Everyone loves a good redemption story. There's just something so beautiful about seeing a character we love fall down a dark path, then slowly work their way back to what we consider good. I think it's in our nature as human beings to want to see people bounce back from where they were at their worst. It makes us reflect on our own lives. It gives us hope. Hope that people can change no matter how bad things get. It's hard to determine what makes a bad or great redemption arc. One thing the majority of us animation fans agree on though, there's one character whose redemption arc is undeniably great.
Hello, Zuko here.
We're talking about a dude who starts his journey as this vengeful teenager who only wants to capture the Avatar and restore his honor. He's rude, he thinks he's above everyone else, but not until he's forced to live amongst the people alongside his loving uncle did he see the errors of his ways. Not just his, but his entire culture. He'd face this both physically and mentally. Ultimately, he'd find himself fighting for what he believes in, and doing so alongside the people he thought he could never trust. Of course, I'm oversimplifying things, but it's not him who I'd like to focus on for this video. Well, you read the title, so it should come as no surprise that we'll be talking about Azula.
Our Princess Azula!
More often than not, polarizing is the word I think of when Azula is brought up in Avatar discussions. These discussions typically involve heated debates about whether or not she deserves a redemption arc. They can get pretty toxic too, as all Avatar discussions do. I mean, honestly, what happened? It gets introduced to Netflix and a whole new wave of the most dense and annoying people spawned from nowhere. Granted, it was 2020, but dude, you can't have a civil discussion with anyone in this fandom anymore. Nevertheless, while there are countless videos out there that talk about their individual hopes of Azula getting a redemption arc or the opposite, I'd still like to talk about it too. I mean, it's better than talking to myself. The first time we officially meet Princess Azula is in Season 2, Episode 1. We did of course see flashbacks of her in Season 1 and in the season finale, but we wouldn't really meet her until we heard Grey DeLisle's iconic voice bring her to life. Early on, we see that she isn't your typical fictional princess. She's a legitimate threat.
Almost perfect. One hair out of place.
Almost isn't good enough.
Azula's entire existence served as a symbol for Fire Nation excellence, a symbol that she of course did not ask for, but she wore confidently, some may even say ferociously. Named after her grandfather Azulan, Fire Lord Ozai had high hopes for Azula. He admired her ability as a gifted young firebender, so it should come as no surprise that he would trust her to find and capture her brother Zuko and the Dragon of the West, her uncle Iroh, both of whom he dubbed traitors of the Fire Nation. Now don't get things twisted, in no way do I believe Ozai showed unconditional love to Azula. I mean, could you imagine Ozai reading Azula bedtime stories and cradling her to sleep at night? Yeah, right. Anyways, Azula would devise a plan to capture Zuko and Iroh. Of course, Iroh suspected something was off when Azula claimed that Ozai had forgiven him and wanted to welcome him back. But Zuko, as naive as he is, was hopeful that there is a chance that he would finally be accepted by his father. Azula is quickly shown to be extremely manipulative, and definitely aware of how important his father's acceptance is to Zuko. Regardless, when the truth is revealed to Zuko, Azula doesn't hold back.
And he considers you a miserable failure for not finding the Avatar. Why would he want you back home, except to lock you up where you can no longer embarrass him?
Well, she clearly doesn't have a great relationship with her brother. Okay, so what about her friends? In Season 2, Episode 3, Return to Omashu, we meet Ty Lee, who at this point is part of a circus. She clearly enjoys her time there. May mentions that Ty Lee called it her calling later in the episode, but when Azula arrives to inform her of the mission to capture Zuko and Iroh, it's clear to Ty Lee that her time there was running out.
Of course, before I leave, I'm going to catch your show. Yeah, sure, of course.
You're quick to question what she's so afraid of. I mean, they embraced when this conversation began, so what worries her so much? Well, during the circus, Ty Lee is performing her act, only Azula isn't exactly enjoying it.
I know. Set the net on fire.
Of course, Princess.
Oh, okay, I understand Ty Lee now.
Ooh, what kind of dangerous animals do you have?
Well, our circus boasts the most exotic assortment.
Release them all!
Oh my god. Well, her fear tactic worked, and she certainly wasn't gonna stop there. She was literally going to go to another show. Ultimately, Ty Lee quits the circus to join Azula, but geez. Well, getting May to join her wasn't all that difficult. I should also mention that May's brother goes missing. When given the opportunity to trade King Bumi for May's brother in return, Azula shuts down that deal. It's understandable that the trade isn't exactly fair, but it's still your supposed close friend's little brother. May seemed okay with it, but it just goes to show how little care Azula has for those around her. She'll never waver if it risks losing the advantage. It helped her claim Amashu though, so clearly it works. I forgot to mention this earlier, but Azula mentions that she and Ty Lee attended the Royal Fire Academy for girls. I'm assuming May went too. Anyways, while we don't know much about that school, we should assume that it was highly prestigious and likely a very discipline-oriented school. And if it's in any way filled with the kind of Fire Nation propaganda we later see in Season 3 with Aang as Kuzan, I couldn't imagine how a prestigious Royal Fire Academy might have affected Azula. How disciplined, precise, and calculated she is. More so than Ozai it often seems. I'm willing to bet the Academy had a massive effect on her.
The Academy.
Season 2, Episode 7, Zuko Alone is probably one of, if not the best episodes in the entire show. Here is when we get more background information on Zuko, of course, but also Azula. We even see Ursa interact with her for the first time. During the first flashback, we see that Iroh has breached Ba Sing Se's outer wall. He writes to Azula and Zuko, even sending them gifts. Azula doesn't really care about this. Instead, she's more interested in what would happen had Iroh not returned from the war. Similar to Ozai, who'd later have similar thoughts after the death of Iroh's son Lu Ten. While Zuko is saddened by the death of Lu Ten, we don't get to really see Azula's immediate perspective. We can only assume that she doesn't care when she calls Iroh a quitter and a loser for returning home from war without completing the invasion.
Uncle's not a quitter.
Oh, yes, he is. He found out his son died and he just fell apart. A real general would stay and burn Ba Sing Se to the ground, not lose the battle and come home crying.
Now look, I'm trying to dissect this show as fairly as I can, but this is just nuts.
He's not exactly the powerful Fire Lord he used to be. Someone will probably end up taking his place soon.
Young lady, not another word. What is wrong with that child?
Yeah, what is wrong with that child? People try to call Ursa out for this, and she's not safe in this video either. But I will forever side with her on this. Tell me you wouldn't have similar thoughts if your kid said something like this about their grandparents. I would immediately assume the worst. Well, anyways, Azula demonstrates her newly learned firebending techniques to Fire Lord Azulon, impressing both he and Ozai. Ozai even called her a prodigy. But what really matters in this context is what happens after. Ozai's disrespect to Fire Lord Azulon, suggesting he betray Iroh by revoking his claim as firstborn son to the throne, was just bad timing. Azulon believed that Ozai had no idea of the pain of losing a firstborn son. Hence,
Dad's going to kill you. Really, he is.
Granted, Azula did warn him, but I don't think she took it as seriously as she should have. She had to have been like 9 to 10 years old, so I get the immaturity, but it's hard for me to assume she doesn't truly understand the concept of death, considering everything she said since these flashbacks began. Ursa leaves, which we learn more from in the comics that I'll get to later, but not only does Azula seem happy that Azulon has now passed, she also used their mom's disappearance as a way to get to Zuko.
You're sick, and I want my knife back, now.
Who's going to make me? Mom?
Important to note that this is all told from Zuko's perspective, but if all of this is to be believed, what is there to be said about Azula? I'd hate to call a child a monster, so we'll just have to keep going to understand more. Okay, I need a break. If ever there were a time I'd need an ad break, it'd be now. We ain't there yet though. Hit that like button. It's funny that Iroh doesn't even try to get Zuko to make amends with Azula. Dude's like, nah man, she gotta go. But don't worry Iroh, I'm coming back to you later as well. But by this point, Azula looks to do more than just return to her father with Zuko and Iroh. Now she wants the Avatar too. Luckily for her, after a fight with the Kabuki warriors, Azula would come up with a plan that would literally make history within the Avatar world.
We are the Earth King's humble servants.
Kid Me was so mad, but she was successful in infiltrating Ba Sing Se. Ba Sing Se was run by the Dai Li, who were pretty much a totalitarian system of government run by Long Feng. Essentially, the Earth King was nothing more than a figurehead as long as Long Feng and the Dai Li were around. As manipulative and dangerous as Long Feng was, capturing Appa almost undetected, and being able to keep the war a secret to many within the walls of Ba Sing Se, but especially the king for crying out loud, he couldn't hold a candle to Azula.
And the Fire Nation princess is cooperating?
Oh yes, more than cooperating. She's really taken charge. She's terrifying and inspirational at the same time.
It came as no surprise that the Dai Li would turn on Long Feng, swear allegiance to Azula, and she would make history in conquering Ba Sing Se. You know what's even crazier? I didn't even mention that she's 14. She's 14! But taking Ba Sing Se wasn't enough. By this point, Zuko is imprisoned in a cave with Katara. Iroh and Aang look to save them, only to be intercepted by Azula. But before the fireworks go off, Azula looks to bring Zuko to her side, telling him how she planned everything that would happen that day. And by aligning with her,
You will have your honor back. You will have Father's love. You will have everything you want.
of course, it's still Zuko's decision, so when he ultimately chooses to help Azula, while she may have manipulated him, Iroh was there too trying to steer him on the right path, and he chose wrong. Oh, just to remind everyone, Katara washes Azula in this fight. Just saying. Well, with the help of Zuko and the Dai Li, the tides start to shift. Aang at this point realizes that he must finish his meditation and open his final chakra wish till this day. Aang, I understand you love Katara, but just finish the meditation, man. I couldn't believe it, and look where it got you. Now most of the world believes that Avatar Aang is dead. Now reveling in her successful venture, bringing Zuko home, capturing her treacherous Uncle Iroh, taking leadership over the Dai Li, and conquering Ba Sing Se, Azula was an unstoppable force. What did we call her earlier? A symbol of Fire Nation excellence? Can't get more excellent than that. But did you notice that out of all of those achievements, I didn't mention killing the Avatar? Well, one, because Katara brought him back, so while she killed him temporarily, he's still here. But also because Azula had another cunning plan.
Why did you tell Father that I was the one who killed the Avatar?
Man, Zuko can't catch a break. She reveals how the glory that would come from their father believing Zuko killed the Avatar would justify his return. You almost believe her until she reminds us that if the Avatar is still alive, all that glory would fall to shame. Wow, it's amazing that someone as calculated as this can fall from grace like she eventually would. I mean, forget Batman. Who you got in a 1v1 between these two? And yes, they both get prep time. Let me know in the comments. I might have to draw that now. Well, I do have to draw Echo and Mbessa first after watching Arcane, but anyways, Season 3 allows us to finally get more character moments from Azula. In Episode 2, she interrupts a date between Mei and Zuko. Mei did not like this, by the way, but we see something from Azula that for the first time actually felt like genuine care.
Believe it or not, I'm looking out for you. If people find out you've been to see Uncle, they'll think you're plotting with him. Just be careful, dum-dum.
I've seen people call Azula a walking contradiction, especially as her journey enters the comics. Nonetheless, she has these moments with Zuko where you can sense that she does love him. Like if Zuko died, I think she'd be extremely affected by this.
I'm about to celebrate becoming an only child!
See, I knew you were gonna go there, but that was when she went crazy. Before then, like during this moment where they're just talking, I think part of her really cared for Zuko. I recall back in Season 2 when she tells Zuko that family is the only thing that you can trust. Granted, she betrayed Zuko minutes later, but just watching her face tense up as she says this. Then as the story goes on and you think of her mother, how she left him, we'll later find out why, but I do think trust matters to Azula in some ways, especially within her immediate family. Unfortunately though, she acts through her own benefit, so it's difficult to tell when she's sincere. This brings us to one of the most talked about episodes in ATLA. Season 3, Episode 5, The Beach. Here we get an opportunity to follow Azula, Zuko, Mei, and Ty Lee, not as pursuers or warriors, but as regular old teenagers. For Azula, we see how even that can be a struggle for her. Azula wants to play volleyball. Seems sweet and all until she starts detailing her game plan.
See that girl with the silly pigtails? When she runs toward the ball, there's just the slightest hesitation of her left foot. I'm willing to bet a childhood injury has weakened her. Keep serving the ball to her left and we'll destroy her and the rest of her team.
She'd be an excellent coach, I'll give her that. Jokes aside, small moments like this gives us a small glimpse at the kind of strategist Azula is. By simply watching the volleyball player's movements, she can assume such terrible things about her past. Again, what were they teaching her at the academy? Maybe I'm giving the academy too much credit. I'm looking at you, Ozai. Anyways, after she wins the volleyball game in convincing fashion, Azula starts tweaking.
Yes! We've defeated you for all time! You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation! Well, that was fun.
She's gotta relax, dude. But there's something familiar about what she says there. You will never rise from the ashes of your shame and humiliation. Ashes, huh? Sounding like Ozai during that Phoenix King speech. Yeah, I'm reaching, but there is something to be said about her need to win. Even while partaking in the most frivolous activities, I think it brings more understanding as to why she struggles to communicate with others around her, especially in her age range. Without instilling fear into the person, Azula really can't communicate with them. She doesn't feel as though she has the control she's accustomed to. Because of this, she straight up violates Ty Lee.
Those boys only like you because you make it so easy for them. You're not a challenge, you're a tease. It's not like they actually care who you are.
Interestingly enough, Azula admits to being jealous. See, a walking contradiction. I like it. Well, she still struggles communicating at the party, and while she got close, communication was never going to become one of her strong suits so soon. So now we reach the scene at the campfire. Man, it's so powerful. Of course, a lot of things are revealed here, but just focusing on Azula, she brings us ever so close to understanding more about her, more specifically her feelings toward her mom. This isn't to ignore her dismissal of Ty Lee's life as a circus performer. Frankly, this friend group sucks. And of course, when Zuko has his monologue, you notice Azula's grin as Zuko mentions his father believing he's a hero, knowing well that she's the cause of that. I mean, if you're a Zuko fan, I know your blood boiled here. But during this very vulnerable moment for everyone, Azula tries to undermine it, but she talks about how her mother loves Zuko more than her. Interesting to note that she said like rather than love.
I could sit here and complain how our mom liked Zuko more than me, but I don't really care. My own mother thought I was a monster.
Here, she does take a moment to process this. I think the others around her even notice that. She tries playing it off, but she does mention that it hurt her. Look, I know there are those who say that Ozai loved Azula more than Zuko as a rebuttal, but guys, do I have to bring this up again? Ozai was not rocking this girl to sleep reading her bedtime stories. Besides, Zuko still had Iroh, he had an out. Azula was there alone in the Fire Nation, in that palace being groomed by her father to be the person we know her as now. While my empathy for her can only go so far based on what she's done in this show alone, there are things we can't deny. Season 3, Episode 15, The Boiling Rock. Yeah, I know, big jump from Episode 5. We did see Azula during the Day of Black Sun, but that was more of a Zuko character moment. I don't really need to tell you how manipulative Azula is again. The importance of this episode, however, is based on the fact that this is the last time we see Azula as this calculated warrior we've grown accustomed to. After that awesome fight on the gondola, we're afraid as it looks like our heroes are about to lose. That is until...
What are you doing?
Saving the jerk who dumped me.
This moment will be the catalyst for Azula's heel turn, or I guess even healer turn. Crash Out Azula is brewing at this point as now two people she thought she could trust, even though she gave them every reason not to, have now betrayed her. You know, we don't give May enough credit. She's like actually a teenager. Well, they all are technically, but I'm speaking solely on her attitude. No one can have you scathing more than a brooding teenager.
I guess you just don't know people as well as you think you do. You miscalculated. I love Zuko more than I fear you.
No, you miscalculated!
But just when you think this moment couldn't get any more exciting, Ty Lee puts the final nail in the coffin for the Azula we once knew. The last two episodes of ATLA were quite amazing to say the least. For Azula, not so much. At this point, everything around her is unraveling. Her brother betrayed her, her friends betrayed her. Again, they all have valid reasons. Reasons I back, but still speaking solely from Azula's perspective, everyone has let her down. Now she's back to square one, alone with her father. The only person she has total faith in. The only person she looks to impress.
There has been a change of plans, Azula.
What?
I've decided to lead the fleet of airships to Ba Sing Se alone. You will remain here in the Fire Nation.
Well, that's not going to be taken well. Before Ozai explains his reasoning, Azula says something that is important to note.
You can't treat me like this. You can't treat me like Zuko!
Many ignore this, but I think this is one of those moments that shows how aware Azula has been in regard to how Zuko is treated by Ozai. Regardless, Ozai explains that he needs Azula to stay in the homeland to protect the Fire Nation. It's a job that he can only entrust to her. He goes as far as to name her the new Fire Lord as he crowns himself the Phoenix King. It's a nice robe and crown too. Pretty sure he just throws it away later though. The relationship between Azula and Ozai is hard to decipher here. Azula having an outburst is uncharacteristic as we know, but Ozai responded to it rather softly, surprisingly. You can see Azula's shock when he names her Fire Lord. It reminds you that she's still a kid. To be so naive thinking that it's out of care when in reality, dude's just promoting himself. Well, the day of her coronation didn't go very well. She goes off on her servant for leaving a pit in her cherry. Cherries are kind of gross, by the way, but then she has an interesting moment with the Dai. She notes that it took 5 minutes for them to arrive. 5 minutes! She begins to question their loyalty because of this, then banishes them. Shorty is tripping. I guess she has a point though. She scoffs at a comment made by one of the agents that they never betray her, which she shuts down when recalling how they betrayed Long Feng to join her. It's like when you steal a lady from someone who already has a partner or vice versa. Like, are you really sure you can trust that person not to do the same to you? All that to say, trust is killing Azula right now. She's removing people left and right, and since her father is gone, she has no guidance, even if that guidance is a manipulative one. Now alone in her mind, visions start to appear.
What a shame. You always had such beautiful hair.
This conversation confirms a lot of what we've discussed prior to this, how Azula uses fear to control people. Azula views it as reliable while trust is for fools. How could she not? In her mind, where has trust gotten her? Even her brother left her alone. One of the saddest moments from this scene comes from when the vision of her mother tells her she loves her. Then Azula breaks down. They do a really good job making you feel for her as a character in this episode, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of this redemption feud. By the end of the series, the final showdown between the Royal Fire siblings was about to commence in an Agni Kai. The victor would be named Fire Lord. You can tell from the messy hair to the baggy eyes that she was off. Of course, we knew that much earlier, but now even Zuko could see it. Also, kinda sad that Ozai had no plans to watch her coronation. As the fight goes on, Zuko for the first time seems to have the advantage over Azula. Azula has always been the aggressor in every fight we've seen her in up to this point, but somehow every blow she landed would be countered by Zuko. She's breathing heavily while Zuko seems calm. She's now attacking sporadically, all to no avail. Zuko makes a mistake though, not really smart to antagonize an insane person. He pushes her to use her lightning. She does, but instead of firing at Zuko, she fires at Katara, only for Zuko to sacrifice himself. This gave Azula the advantage, and now Katara was on the defensive. While Azula's ferocity proved too much for Katara in a direct battle, Katara had another trick up her sleeve. As she was being chased, she crashed down seeing that a grate filled with water was below her. This offered Katara the perfect opportunity. I didn't register this on my own. I actually got this from YouTuber Shady Durax, but as he mentions, it's kind of poetic that Azula ultimately lost to someone who is literally the embodiment of love. It's one of those things where by this point, Azula is completely void of love, with all the people she thought she could trust betraying her in some way, whether right or not. For Azula, it left her more hateful than ever before. And this is the byproduct of a tyrant, might I remind you. What more hate does she need? Ultimately, seeing Azula ugly cry in the end hurt, even when I was a kid, no joke. And when I was a kid, man, I hated Azula. But still, you knew it wasn't the time to celebrate. It was a legitimately sad moment where you likely did want redemption for her. For me, it took a long time to come to terms with that. I'm still mulling it over, but I can't ever comfortably look at that scene and not see a kid crying for help. So we know the two sides of this debate. One side isn't in favor of redemption for Azula, the other is. Now why? When it comes to the Redeem team, I can see why they want this. I mean, there are a lot of characters in this universe who've made mistakes in life and were able to come back from them. Hell, even in her own family. There's Zuko, there's Iroh especially. I know we all love Uncle Iroh. We sympathize with him. Leaves from the Vine makes us cry every time. But the man is a war criminal. The only good thing this guy has ever done in his past was refuse to kill a dragon. Beyond that, he still has a history of being an Imperial enforcer, and a respected one at that. We know Zuko's story too. Presumably 3 years of hunting the Avatar. Who's to tell what he did during his search? I mean, he did send an assassin after Aang. He threatened to burn down what was left of the Southern Water Tribe, and he nearly burned Kyoshi Island to the ground. These characters are not perfect. As much as we love them, we have to be clear about that without forgetting it when discussing Azula. More on that in a second. So, the team not in favor of Azula's redemption. I'm not going to spew the same argument that you're all a bunch of women haters. No, because that would be calling Kid Me a woman hater, and like, this show is literally girl boss central, so I feel like that's ridiculous. Regardless, some arguments I tend to hear are the fact that she showed no signs of goodness. Some questions, why ruin the perfect villain? I kinda get these points. In the show specifically, I felt like there were hints here and there. I feel like the only time I looked at Azula and said, hey, maybe you're not so bad after all, was when she apologized to Ty Lee after being mean to her at the party. There was also the warning she gave Zuko, but still, her manipulation has corrupted so many of these characters that it's like, if you're Ty Lee, is that one good deed going to wash away all that manipulation and fear? She's big on chakras and stuff, so maybe, but I don't know. I think Zuko still cares about Azula, and if there is anyone out there that would actually take the time to try and make things right with her, it would probably be him. As far as ruining the perfect villain argument, yeah, I get that argument. I guess I look at it this way. Where does it stop? So we give Azula a redemption arc because her father was an abusive, manipulative groomer, and unlike Zuko, she didn't have an uncle to steer her in the right direction. I get that, but what about Ozai? Why not give him a redemption arc too? He was likely manipulated by Azula, similar to Iroh, as we know he was once a war general. I mean, maybe that's just semantics, fine, but that's okay. I'm not sold on any one side yet, because if you look on the Avatar Studios website, the comics, ladies and gentlemen, are now confirmed canon. So, let's take a look at a few of them. This search. Out of all the comics I've read in the Avatar Aang Legend series, this one still holds a special place at the top. Don't worry though, I'm not doing a deep dive on the comics. This video is long enough. But there was a couple things I wanted to talk about. One, Ursa. This story did a great job showing that while Ursa is still a victim of Ozai, she still made her own share of mistakes. Like, I get it, Ozai made it clear that you can never have your children back, but I think it was wrong for her to willingly forget them. If you're lost, and yes, I will be discussing spoilers, obviously, but to accept the Mother of Faces proposition to wipe your memory of your previous life is genuinely insane. Unforgivable, honestly. Or maybe it is forgivable, I guess it's certainly understandable, but I don't think she was pressed enough for this. Back with Azula though, she begins the story coming off Season 3's finale. And as you can probably guess, they had to put her in a straitjacket. Zuko is very naive in this comic, coming to an agreement with Azula where he'd allow her to walk without bonds if she helped him find her mother. To no one's surprise other than Zuko, Azula keeps being difficult. Granted, she does save them one time. I think they try to show as the story progresses that there is some good to Azula. Even Aang hopes that there is a chance for her. Once we reach the end of the comic, Azula learns the truth about Ursa's secret identity. In a tough battle where Zuko is trying to prevent her from killing their mother, Azula gains the advantage and is able to trap Ursa. This is where things start getting pretty damn sad, man. You see, up to this point, Azula has been accusing people of doing her mother's bidding to get at her. Saying things like, she put you up to this. She's seeing images of her mom, it's constantly nagging her. So when she confronts Ursa, and Ursa doesn't even remember her, it's like, how can Azula get any closure? While Ursa is entirely confused, Azula says, so I've imagined all this. You haven't been trying to take me down from the moment I was born. Then Ursa says that if everything she said is true, then I'm sorry I didn't love you enough. Dude.
That's rough, buddy.
Zuko got the advantage a few times in this comic. At one point, he even had the opportunity to toss her off a cliff and be done with it, which Azula mentions. But Zuko tells her that their relationship is messed up, and likely always will be. But no matter what, she's still his goddamn sister, man. Azula just tells him to shut up. Jokes aside, she was actually affected by this. She was done fighting, and ultimately decided to escape before telling Zuko that even when he's strong, he's still weak with tears in her eyes. Redemption crowd, y'all are seriously reeling me in here. Well, the other members of the gang convinced the Mother of Faces to give them a second wish. But the Mother of Faces is actually pretty cool, so she does more than that. Ursa gets her face back, along with the memories, so now things are about to get super interesting. Bottom line is, you need to read The Search. I swear to you, this book is like watching the show. Solid stuff. Well, this comic just didn't do it for me. It's not terrible, but if you're an Azula fan, you might not want to read it. Zuko, Mei, and Aang were pretty great in this though. Basically, the writer, who also wrote The Search, really wanted Azula to have her Zuko Crossroads of Destiny moment. While that's interesting, I'm pretty sure Zuko choosing to go back to the Fire Nation isn't the same as kidnapping children. Like, why? Don't get me wrong, Zuko's choice was pretty much in aid of Azula, This same aid would lead to Azula essentially killing Aang. Yo, this girl is something else, man. Well, look, they do give her one scene with Zuko where he says that he can tell she's better again. Like, she fights better and she looks healthy. Well, Azula's kind of healthy. Her goal in this story is to turn Zuko into the kind of Fire Lord she wants him to be, as she has embraced the fact that it's not in her destiny to be the Fire Lord herself. She says that it's freeing, which makes me wonder. The last thing Ozai gave Azula was the position of Fire Lord, and it was likely something he always wanted her to be. Embracing this new reality, in a way, it released her from her father's control. I think Zuko recognized this too. Maybe not entirely, but he definitely thought it was good that she felt free. Okay, maybe this comic wasn't all bad, but come on, leave the children alone. I feel like it was too much of a regression from what they did with her in The Search. Ultimately, it's clear that her redemption arc is going to take a long time, which admittedly makes a lot of sense. Azula in the Spirit Temple worried me in the beginning. They gave you the early impression that they were going to be treading familiar grounds as we once again see these hooded women traversing on rooftops. Luckily, that wasn't the case. Azula is back with her band of misfits. While she's thankfully not kidnapping children, she is back to trying to antagonize Zuko by blowing up supplies he's responsible for. Only this isn't the first time, and so Ty Lee and some Fire Nation soldiers are prepared for their attack. Azula is different in this comic, but in a strange way, it's like she's trying to be something she once was. She wants to be calculated and manipulative, but she can't do it like she used to. When one of her allies is captured, the other members want to save her, only Azula is against this, saying that casualties are the price of war. Her allies don't agree, so we see Azula try to use fear to get her way. It almost works, but the girls plan to save the girl anyway without Azula knowing. Azula wakes up actually looking kind of relaxed. That's until she realizes that her allies left her. She feels betrayed. She says they're ungrateful, and now walking for hours in the rain, she constantly repeats, "I'll make them pay." Eventually, she stumbles on a temple. Only this temple is more of a spirit temple. She's greeted by a woman who we later learn is a spirit. She reveals that this temple is designed as a resting spot for those searching for rest. You will have good dreams that will suit your needs rather than your reality. The dream started off great. She was on Ember Island, Ozai, Iroh, Ursa, Zuko, and that one guy that Zuko thought was hitting on May were there. Based on what is said by her dream family members, we get the sense that Azula wants to be appreciated for her accomplishments, particularly by her mother who tells her that she's proud of her. That comes to an end when visions of May and Azula remind her that this isn't real. The spirit sees that the temple did not give Azula peace, and insists that Azula leave immediately. But that wasn't possible anymore. Now we finally get some history on Azula and Ursa. We first see Azula as a kid. She has a baby turtle duck in her hand, and she's using firebending on it. That's not a good sign. Maybe it was a toy, I don't know, but Ursa is clearly disappointed seeing that she's firebending. A total contrast to Ozai, who is enthusiastic about it. Of course, it was for his own interest, but still. He tells Ursa to tell Azula she's proud. Ursa is reluctant, but ultimately says, "You are your father's daughter." Well then, we then see something happen to Ursa. She looks scared, but suddenly the vision shatters. One side is real, the other looks to be creating a false reality. This reality shows a happy Ursa, a loving Ozai. They're both supportive and seem to love each other as well. Azula eventually realizes this and mentions that it never happened, that Ursa wasn't happy for her, she was scared for her, or rather scared of her. She questions this too. I don't think it's fair for me to assume when it comes to a topic like this, but it is likely that Ursa was scared for her. Nevertheless, the spirit is confused as to why Azula won't accept the visions that gave her what she desires most. But understandably, Azula doesn't want to accept the false reality, going as far to question how she'd think she'd accept her lies and manipulation. Kinda ironic, huh, Azula? Well, the woman now reveals her spiritual form, at least part of it. But then Azula says that she doesn't need anything from her family, that they're all traitors except for Ozai. Only now he's useless. She considers herself to be the last true heir to the throne, which is crazy since I thought she accepted that that wasn't her purpose. Whatever the case may be, it's so saddening to hear that the only person she can trust is Ozai. Well, more visions enter the temple. Ty Lee enters. She calls Azula out for many things involving manipulation, but the vision of Ursa's arrival was where things would really heat up. Azula tells her that Ursa ruined her, claiming she chose Zuko over her. She says she saved Zuko by using poison to kill Azula, then just left. She says that she abandoned her, that she didn't protect her from Ozai, so she became what he wanted, his deadly weapon. She says she had no choice, and had she let Zuko die, she wouldn't be who she is now, alone and betrayed. Heavy words here, man. Not gonna lie, I really wish this was the real Ursa, but based on what Azula says here, I just don't know how to feel. I feel for her when she says that Ursa left her alone to Ozai. I hear her when she says she had no choice but to become a weapon for him, but I just can't agree that she chose Zuko over her. She was saving her child, and I have no doubt that had Ozai been ordered to kill Azula instead, Ursa would have done the same thing to save her. My biggest gripe with Ursa is that she wiped her memory, but beyond that, I can understand Ursa's actions, but I also understand why Azula feels so angry at her. The spirit asks Azula if she wants her friends, her family, her acolytes to all apologize to her and acknowledge their betrayal, and Azula says yes. Suddenly, a vision of May enters, and now we get the perspective of a fan who really doesn't want to see an Azula redemption arc. May questions how she could ever play victim, calling her a terrible person that deserves what she gets. Azula is tired of this. May is now Ty Lee again, now Ty Lee is Ursa, then Ursa is now May. But when Zuko appears, it seems like a real breakthrough is made. Funnily enough, when she sees Zuko, she jokes if Iroh will be next. It's funny because Zuko may actually be built up to perform that role. But anyways, he tells her that the reason she surrounds herself with people to manipulate and harm is because she can't stand to face the world alone. Because being alone would mean she'd have to face all the horrible things she's done, especially the way she hurt the people who cared for her. This was the dagger for Azula, but she didn't concede to this. Azula strikes the spirit. She's done. So the spirit transforms, taking the form that mirrors Azula's inner self, a monster. Ultimately, Azula takes ownership of her claim as the daughter of the Phoenix King and the rightful Fire Lord. She rejected redemption. When she escaped the temple, she found her old acolytes who betrayed her alongside another member who had gotten captured. But instead of attacking them, she left. She said she'd find new followers, but even still, I think a breakthrough was truly made, no matter how small it may have been. I am 22 pages into this script. This is going to be a long video, but hey, we made it to the end. This was hard. Purely looking at this as a fan watching his favorite cartoon of all time, I just didn't know how to approach this topic. It's a sensitive subject for some people, so my personal opinion will be said, but I'm going to be as objective as I can be. I believe that everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves. We all make mistakes, and never want to be villainized for those mistakes. We want people to give us a chance to make things right, a quality lost among many nowadays in this technological world. Before making this video, I didn't care to see Azula redeemed. From a narrative standpoint, it just felt unnecessary. Honestly, even when reading the comics, it almost felt like we have these fans that really want to see this, so we have to do it. I can't tell you that I hate that. If there's an audience for it, then do it. I can look at Iroh and see that he's been redeemed and think, why can't Azula? I can watch the greatest redemption arc of all time and think, why can't Azula? I have these questions, and many who want this arc have these questions because we see all of the flawed people in this girl's life. Ozai doesn't need much explanation, but there's reason to believe that even he struggled with the same propaganda, the same grooming and manipulation that would plague Azula in more or less ways. We know that Ursa had her dream life taken from her, and so was never happy with her life in the palace. She wasn't the perfect mother. I believe she loved both Zuko and Azula equally, but Zuko's life was in danger, so Ursa made choices she'll have to one day soon face Azula with. Azula faced so much without having an Uncle Iroh. She had no one that understood the evils that the Fire Nation teaches, and how to steer away from it. This is the reality, and maybe there are those out there who feel that's a good thing. Not her struggle, but that a great character arc can be to see this confident character fall from grace. And I'm not against those who think that way. The newest comic on the way is The Ashes of the Academy. Supposedly Zuko is in fear for his half-sister Ki because she will be attending the very strict Royal Fire Academy. My worry is that that school may have negatively influenced Azula, but I still think was hinted at in the episode with Aang as Kuzan may finally be addressed. Whether we like it or not, it's looking like Azula is headed down the path of redemption. She may have a long journey. She may even reject it, but it's bound to happen. And if it doesn't, then I fear Azula's arc will end far more tragically. Overall, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you made it to the end. Things are about to shift drastically in my life. I'm getting ready to leave Chicago next month, and so I may be gone for a while depending on how this video does. I think I'm getting ready to face the crossroads of destiny myself. Nonetheless, thank you again for watching. This took a while to make, but I had a blast doing it. Until next time.